Raise some.
Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.
Welcome, folks, to another edition of the Raising Cain Show. Tonight, we've got a great show planned ahead of us. We are welcoming Brandon J. Weichart, Senior National Security Editor at 1945.com and host of National Security Talk on Rumble. He is the author of 4 best-selling books, and including A Disaster of Our Own Making, How the West Lost Ukraine, a former congressional staffer and consultant to the U.S. Department of Air Force. Brandon delivers incisive insight into global decisions and their impacts on American strength and sovereignty. Stay tuned for this important conversation. We are going to cut to a commercial break, and when we come back, we'll get right into it. Stick with us, folks.
Heard of Q Broadcast? It's taking the world by storm. People are cutting the cord to their high cable bills and moving away from streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and others for something better. Q Broadcast. For just $60 a month, you'll get access to every channel you could ever want, including HBO, Cinemax, and Stars. And the best part? There are no contracts, no hidden fees, and you're free to cancel anytime. With Q Broadcast, you can enjoy streaming live TV, movies, and top series on up to 5 devices at once. Whether you're at home or on the go, Q Broadcast makes sure your entertainment is always at your fingertips. Imagine being able to watch all your favorite channels from anywhere, anytime, without any restrictions. We're talking about thousands of movies, hundreds of TV series, and a huge library of live channels, all in one place. And don't forget video on demand and pay-per-view events. Those are included at no extra cost, so you'll never miss a big event again. Now, take a second and think about your current cable bill. You're probably paying anywhere between $100 and $300 every month, locked into long-term contracts and hit with surprise rate increases. With Q Broadcast, that's a thing of the past. It's just $60 a month. No contracts, no extra fees, no hidden costs, and no price hikes. Why juggle multiple subscriptions like Netflix, Hulu, and cable when Q Broadcast gives you everything you need in one convenient package? People everywhere are switching to Q Broadcast, saving money and getting more content than ever before. So, what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description and sign up for Q Broadcast today. Just $60 a month, no contracts, no hidden fees. It's time to take control of your entertainment and start streaming smarter.
Good evening, Patriots, and welcome back to the Raising Cain Show. Our special guest is Brandon J. Weichart, Senior National Security Editor at 1945.com, host of National Security Talk on Rumble, and author of 4 best-selling books, including A Disaster of Our Own Making, How the West Lost Ukraine. A former congressional staffer and U.S. Air Force consultant, Brandon provides sharp analysis on how global decisions affect America's future, strength, and sovereignty. Please join me in welcoming Brandon. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Well, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me, Nate.
So there's been a lot of things that have been happening all around the world.
Yeah.
This is a time of geopolitical news like nothing I've ever seen before.
Yeah.
Let's jump right into this. What are your right now? If there's a story that's happening that people are not paying attention to. We have the stuff, obviously going on right now
Yeah.
in the Straits of Hormuz. There's things happening in Europe with NATO. There's a lot of things we've been talking about on this show. But what's one story that is kind of been hidden from the public, or maybe hasn't been getting attention, that you see as kind of a major geopolitical shift that is happening right now?
Well, in my humble opinion, the story of the day, the story of the last several decades, been talked about, but it's not really been fully ever understood, is China's rise as a global competitor to the US, and what nature or what nature the threat is, because we all assume, oh well, it must be military. And as I was telling you before we got started, I keep telling, when I brief the Air Force, when I brief the Navy, the few times I briefed them, when I brief the Marines, I always tell them, yeah, the military side is obviously going to be the direct threat that our military has to handle, but it's actually the geoeconomic, it's the economic threat that China poses us. And the crazy thing about China, or the interesting thing, is the reason they're a threat to us is because they've replicated our strategy that we used to displace the British Empire as the dominant power. And we did this very effectively using industrial warfare, and not fighting the British, obviously, but creating alternative ecosystems using scale and industry to basically displace the British hegemony over the world. And then by the time the 1940s happened and World War II ended, the shift was inevitable to us bloodlessly. The Chinese have engineered, or they're trying to engineer, a similar tactic or similar strategy, where they have basically created an entire alternative industrial ecosystem to our own. Their industrial ecosystem is actually more efficient, cheaper, and in many ways more effective than our own. And they are just, through scale, dominating every aspect of the global economy, and dominating specifically certain key industries like rare earth mineral production, so that basically, even when they can't beat us directly with innovation or with a different product or whatever, they can then at least hold us hostage by saying, "Oh, you want to have rare earth minerals for your missiles that you've just blown through in the Iran war? Guess what? We hold the keys to that industry. 94, I think, percent of the world's known rare earth minerals are basically controlled by China." And they're not going to let us have access to it if they don't want us to have it. And so that, to me, it's a longer term story. It's not as sexy as getting ready for war or whatever. But this is a very interesting and scary time, because in fact, I think that the Chinese, very badly, and they say this, their own propaganda, they say this, by 2049, the 100th year anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China, when Mao defeated Chiang Kai-shek in the Chinese Civil War and announced that his government was now going to run China, the Chinese government wants to be the number one power in the world. They want to knock the Americans down, and they want to be number one. And I really think that right now, because of how we've become so involved in all of these wars, we spent almost, what was it? The Brown University study has $1.4 trillion over 20 years was spent on the global war on terror. All the money we're spending now on this war in Iran, everything we've done in Ukraine, these things have not really benefited the United States at that strategic level. There's a funny meme that has Xi Jinping sitting proudly, and the meme reads, "Xi Jinping does nothing, still wins." And that's sort of the mentality in China. And in some respects, the reason that meme has gone viral is not just the Chinese bot farms, but it's also because it's true. The Chinese have free rode off of our security guarantees for 40 years. And in the meanwhile, they've undercut us very quietly by just creating better, more lucrative deals, not necessarily challenging us militarily. That will change soon, I think.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think that's the real story. And this Iran war, like I was telling you before, yes, we have tactically dominated this conflict in many respects. Although I would say we also tactically dominated the North Vietnamese the entire Vietnam War, and we still lost at the strategic and political level. And so when it comes to Iran, dominating tactically just doesn't mean the same thing it used to, especially in a global economic environment where everything is integrated. And we, frankly, and our allies are more exposed to the negative downsides of the Iran war. And China is becoming supercharged as a result, either directly or indirectly.
Yeah, one thing's for sure. While we are spending an awful lot of our munitions and our naval resources, on this war in Iran, which at the end of the day, um, it really it doesn't have. I mean, while I do think that there was a threat there with nuclear weapons development, I do think that there was a threat there, with the ballistic missile development. The reality is for staying there at any long term, I don't see a real benefit,
Yeah.
for us as a nation. And so now we're kind of, stuck there with this blockade, trying to bring an end, to the IRGC. And meanwhile, China, is shoring up,
Yeah.
their resources now. There's some interesting things that have been happening, though. And I agree with you. I do think that something's about to shift in the way that China has been projecting power. They've primarily done that, I think, through economic power, through the building of the Sand Islands and,
Yeah.
through, their Belt and Road Initiative. And they have a habit of kind of getting people to become dependent on them.
Yes.
And they've done this all around the world. Most people have really no understanding of just how deep they are in running and owning ports around the world.
Yeah.
In places like even in Kenya, in Africa and other parts around the world. They for crying out loud. Under Obama, they were running and operating the port of LA, which is just
Yeah.
Unbelievable. So
Well, and to be clear, and we saw this possibly with Eric Swalwell as a keen example,
Yeah.
but through those deals in LA and San Francisco and Silicon Valley and whatnot, there's a lot of companies exposed to China. I have long contended that the Democratic Party of the West Coast, notably in California, is deeply exposed to CCP influence because of the connectivity that California in particular has economically to China.
yeah, and to be honest with you, I don't even think that is. I think that they're on the left. There's maybe a greater ties, ideologically, with socialism and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But there's also been, prominent Republicans,
Yep.
who have had
Chamber of Commerce types.
That's right, who have
Yeah.
had ties to
Oh yeah.
the Chinese, the new China economic policy,
Yeah.
that they have been, moving forward with. And so, that's I think a real threat, overall to, the long-term US strategy. The one thing that I do see shifting though, and I'm wondering how this is all going to play out. And so I'm curious to get your thoughts on it. Whether it is the US involvement in taking out these, drug cartels, shipping drugs into our
Yeah.
country, or the hardening of our border, on the southern border against, with Mexico. Now we've got the very first action that Trump did in this administration was he had Rubio go down to Panama and kick the Chinese out of Panama. Then we took Venezuela and and took Maduro, and basically have ensured that the current government there is being cooperative with us. It seems to me that there's been a shift of policy to say, oh, hey, we are going to look after our own in our own backyard, and and dominate that area. And even though we're involved in this mess right now in in the Straits of Hormuz and in that area, I do wonder if after we're done with this, if there's going to be a major pullback. I mean, you look at what's going on with NATO, you look at what's happening in Europe, you look at the posturing that Trump has been making, even statements that he made, even to Japan. Just recently, he said, look, Japan didn't help us, South Korea didn't help us. It almost seems like he's trying to prepare people for a major pullback of the U.S. back to the Western Hemisphere. Do you think that's the case, or do you think that that's just
Yeah. I think that is likely going to happen. I don't think this is part of a grand plan, though. I've never been a real believer in 5D chess Trump. I
Yeah,
think
I don't
that's,
either.
I think he is America's id. So he tends to be a very kind of in the moment player. And I don't think there's any grand plan here. 10 years ago, I would have given you a different answer when he was first getting into politics, but it's very obvious on a retinue of things where that he's in the moment. He doesn't actually, he's sort of just rolling with it and seeing what he can get out of it. And, which, okay, fine. But I don't believe for a second that this is a plan. I do think that what you're saying in terms of sort of America withdrawing from the world, I think that is inevitable and natural. The problem that we're now facing, just like the Afghan withdrawal in 2021, it's not that we shouldn't have gotten out, it's how we got out. That was the problem. And the same thing on a larger scale now is happening because the president, beginning in the last summer, you had guys like Undersecretary of Defense or Undersecretary of War, or whatever they're calling it now, Bridge Colby, who was kind of spearheading the writing of the National Security Strategy memo. And this was the guidance document basically for how the U.S. was going to craft its grand strategy under the second Trump term. And then you had also the National Defense Strategy memo, which was related. So you had these two documents released within a few months of each other, and one in November and then one, I think, in December or January. But basically, they both said the same thing, that Trump wanted to draw down around the world, refocus his attention on the Western Hemisphere and homeland defense and space-based missile defenses, and let the rest of the world sort of deal with itself. This was, I thought, a very prudent strategy given the decline of the United States relative to China in the last 15 years. If we had done that the way that those strategy memos outlined, which was not spasmodic, it was very methodical. We were not going to just abandon everything. We were going to slowly step back in certain places, sort of like triage. We're going to triage certain regions. We're going to focus, though, on our backyard so we can push the malign influence out of our hemisphere, rehabilitate our sphere of influence, and then after that moment and rebuild our industry. And after about 10 years of that, we would be able to have more options where we could engage more fully with the rest of the world, rather than fighting this endless, holding action that's a losing one. Unfortunately, though, we had those strategies put out, and within a month and a half of the national defense strategy, we ended up now ripping open the Middle East. And I think the end result will be the same, that the United States is going to be out of the Middle East. The United States is going to withdraw to a high degree from Europe. We're thankfully not going to get involved with Africa. And we're probably going to also be kicked, I think, out of that first island chain in the Indo-Pacific, which includes Taiwan. But the way this is happening is not from a position of responsibility or prudence or strength. It's because we've overcommitted so much and we don't have enough backup to kind of complete these mission sets. We have to start pulling back now. And that to me is a very tragic thing, because now instead of doing it from a position of strength, we're doing it from a position of weakness. And that's never good, especially in this current environment where there are at least two other major challengers to the U.S., which is, of course, China, and then to a lesser degree, Russia.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting. I was looking, and just a couple of days ago, I think it was, that you had Japan sent one of its warships through the Straits of Taiwan, and which is a huge, provocation to the Chinese. And they did it while the Russians were in China meeting.
That's why they did it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And a lot of people don't know about the Northern Islands and the
Kuril Islands.
that have been going on with Russia now and Japan for a long time. And I think that has a lot to do with it. So it's kind of interesting. So you're seeing Japan taking a more active role, I think, in their defense, and not just in their defense, but also even a more, forceful,
provocative
and show of force type of, a thing. So maybe it is time to kind of start shifting and allowing, or encouraging, I should say, them to basically start
which I'm all for. I'm for all that.
Yeah.
I've advocated for that for years. I will just tell you though, I am very worried when Japan does. I mean, I'm all for Japan building more ships. I'm all for them building more defensive systems, increasing the size of their overall force and capability. I'm all for that. But when they start sailing ships through the Strait of Hormuz, I don't know if you remember, but a few months back, or 3 or 4 months back, the Japanese got into quite a tiff with the Chinese that resulted in Japanese warplanes overflying Chinese warships. I think in not the Bashi Strait, in the I'm forgetting the waterway. Ryukyu, I think.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
set of islands with the fishing boats.
Yeah,
and all
exactly. So they overflew and they buzzed basically the Chinese aircraft carrier that was conducting operations. So that to me is highly provocative and could potentially, especially with the current government in Japan, that could potentially spiral to the point where the U.S. through our mutual defense treaty is now suddenly pulled into a fight that we cannot afford right now because Japan has gone too far and they've dragged us into another war. In fact, I've been saying this for the last several months. Of course, the Taiwan flashpoint is very real and could pop off soon. I actually think, though, if there is going to be any crisis geopolitically with China, it's actually going to be it's going to be a standoff between China and Japan, because Japan right now is extremely concerned. The government is very, very hawkish there. And the government of Japan is very worried that the U.S. is not fully committed, and I don't think we are, to upholding that mutual defense treaty. So I actually think a lot of these provocations you're seeing from Japan against China are actually not aimed at Beijing at all. They're actually aimed at Washington. They want to see what the Americans are going to do, because this is them testing the waters to see if a war ever really did break out, how much support from Uncle Sam would they have? And I think they're realizing that Uncle Sam's not going to have their back the way they think. And I think that's doubly true for Taiwan and probably the Philippines as well, which is why I said earlier, I really think that we might have already lost the first island chain. The Chinese don't even really have to start a war. They have to just keep doing what they've been doing, and we have to keep doing what we've been doing, which is bleeding ourselves in other parts of the world. And then when the crisis comes to that first island chain, which is the territories basically from the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia, cutting down through Japan, Taiwan, and into the Philippines, basically Uncle Sam can't really be there in any real way, because we've depleted ourselves in the Middle East and in Ukraine, and then we're trying to pivot to Latin America. So it's this sort of, something has to go, something has to give. And I'm very worried that the Chinese know this, and so they're just waiting for that natural balance to flip in their favor. In some ways, it already has.
They certainly are willing to play the long game. That's
absolutely,
that's part of their strategy.
It's also a cultural thing.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a 4,000 plus year old country. People need to remember China. I mean, yes, the Chinese Communist Party is only like 70 years old, 50 years old, but China has been a country it's been an empire for, thousands and thousands of years. So this is a cultural thing as well.
Now there's another, kind of interesting take on what's happening in the Middle East that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about. I've heard a few people bring it up, but I remember back during the first Gulf War, there was a theory, some might call it conspiracy theory, but I do think that it has some weight, especially as I've kind of dug into things and done a lot of reading onto it, which is that there was threats that were going on to the petrodollar. And that's what really ultimately what drew us into the Gulf War, and that may be the very same thing that is, and I don't think these things are simple black and white either. I think that there's a lot of nuance to it. I do think that there were threats, with the uranium. I mean, Trump has made it clear for a very long time. He's talked about the threat of nuclear weapons. He seems to be his greatest fear. And he's also talked about the threat of Iran for a very long time too. So I think that's been in this forefront of his mind. But I think when you take that, you add to it And he said, if it's interesting, he was interviewed and he was asked about, oh, this was just, was this just Israel pulling us into this war? And he said, no, absolutely not. He says, look, what drew us into this war was what happened on October 7th. He said, when he saw that, he said that changed everything for him. And I do think that there's probably some truth to that. I also think that when there's something else though that's not being talked about, like I said, which is the petrodollar and the BRIC system. And
Yeah.
if you see what's happening with all of this, I think it definitely has delayed all of that. It has forced the Gulf states and others to reconsider their positions in selling oil without using the US dollar.
Mm.
Ultimately, I don't know if the threat is as bad as some of the economic analysts or monetary analysts, would say, but the threat that was being talked about was that since Saudi Arabia basically did not renew their agreement on the petrodollar, that ultimately over a period of time that would lead to a total collapse of the US dollar.
Yeah.
And some were predicting that it would be catastrophic. Others were predicting that it would be bad, but eventually that, we would find something else to be able to, prop it up.
Oh, it would be catastrophic.
Yeah.
It would be all of the chickens coming home to roost economically at once. And it's not, and I actually think that my personal belief is that the Iran war has actually likely expedited in the long run the evolution of an alternative currency, the BRICS note or whatever, Russia, China dominated. You're already seeing it now. It's true that countries like Japan and these European countries, they've certainly started to buy more American debt, which that's good for the dollar. It's good for us. They're taking in more dollars, but that's a short-term thing, I think, and I think it's because
we're not slowing down our printing of money,
right?
And ultimately, that's what's caused this problem.
Yes,
and if we don't change the way that we do things. Now maybe Trump can stave that off with.
I don't think Trump wants to. Trump, remember, he was very proud of the fact that he was known as the king of debt in the 90s. I think and this is how he built his businesses. He just leveraged everything and it was very effective for him. And I think he doesn't view debt the way that a Dave Ramsey would, or, the way that maybe you and I are thinking, but I think that he doesn't mind that. I do think, though, that you're right. He was keenly aware that debt suddenly becomes very bad if the petrodollar is dead.
Yeah.
And so I do think that was probably in the back of his mind. But I really am not sold that the Iran war was something that he thought out very well. Maybe Israel, and I said this on Megyn Kelly's show not long ago. I said, I do think Israel had a degree of, I use this word loosely, a degree of influence in the sense that Trump is very close with Netanyahu. Trump has a very close relationship with Netanyahu and with certain pro-Israel elements in the United States, in the Republican Party, not just Miriam Adelson, but the donor class in general of the GOP is very pro-Israel.
Absolutely.
And Trump is very close with these people. Plus, Trump did a lot of business in New York, and a lot of his close personal friends, they're Jewish and naturally they're pro-Israel. And so this is sort of just, these are his people. These are people that he knows. And so he's inclined, I think he's inclined.
He also, that he also lives in South Florida. So
that's right. And I live in South Florida too. So yes, of course. I mean, and so I think he's just naturally inclined.
Yeah. I don't think it's a brand conspiracy of anything. I think it's just exactly what you said. Look,
I do think on one level, though, I do know his family is doing a lot of business with Israeli companies. And so there could be some exposure there. But I just think he's close with them. He's close with Netanyahu. He's, and he just thought, and Netanyahu, I really do think, Netanyahu has a tendency to overstate. And I think Netanyahu sold Trump on this idea. if you go into Iran, it's going to be like Venezuela. It'll be 96 hours. We'll knock off the Ayatollah and it'll all fall into place. And I think Trump thought that. And I think 96 hours later, he realized, this isn't Venezuela.
If I would say that there's been a miscalculation, I think the miscalculation has been on the resolve of the IRGC.
Yes.
In part, and then to be honest with you, the sad part is, I think a lot of what we're seeing in terms of the problems with the IRGC is the fact that there's no clear leader anymore. And so everybody's, it's a faction, against faction. And maybe in the end, maybe that ends up, leading to the Iranian people taking back their.
Trump certainly thinks that, because he said, now he was on the tarmac in the last 24 hours at Andrews Air Force Base. And it might have been today when he said, I'm not going to send negotiators to meet with the Iranians in Pakistan because we don't even know who's in charge. So he clearly is glommed onto this notion that there are these different fractured centers of power.
Mhm.
I would just look, I don't want to toot my own horn, but I have called this war pretty much correctly from the beginning. In fact, I even predicted when it was going to start. And you can go back to my episodes I did with Steve Bannon where I was calling it, and Bannon was getting very annoyed with me. And I
had a sense this was coming just based on where our ships were headed.
Exactly. Well, that was sort of my right. But also, I understand. I have a book on the Iran Revolutionary Guard. I understand the Revolutionary Guard. So they had 47 years basically in Iran to prepare for the exact kind of attacks that they have sustained from us in Israel. So they have decentralized their power base, and they have hardened those decentralized aspects. So you're right that there is a downside, which is that there's some miscommunication. There's, not really coordination the way there should be in a more centralized setting. But I just remind everybody, we spent 25 years fighting decentralized terrorist networks throughout the Middle East. We never defeated them. We killed a lot of them. We broke up a lot of them, but we never beat them. And remember, Al-Qaeda, they were the king of the franchise model where you had AQP, you had Al-Qaeda Prime hiding out in Pakistan and, in the federally tribal areas of Pakistan and Afghanistan. You had bin Laden in Abbottabad. Bin Laden wasn't really pulling the shot, pulling the strings. It was decentralized and it was very effective.
Well, and the thing too that's interesting is that, like, even right now, in case in point, we can basically destroy all of the Islamists in the Middle East and they pop up in North Africa.
Right.
Look what happened. I think it was just yesterday or today. You have a war breaking out in Mali.
Yeah. I saw that a little bit.
And you basically had the two different factions that basically joined force. The Islamists and basically your terrorist groups are now joined with the separatist groups. Yeah. And they've come together to basically take over that country, and nothing is going to stop them. In fact, the Russians were supposed to stop them, and essentially were pretty much a paper tiger.
Yeah. I think the Russians are keeping a lot of their powder dry right now, given what's going on. Yeah. I would just remind everybody, though, that I would blame us, the United States, for destabilizing that whole part of the world in 2011. We had no business going after Gaddafi, especially at that point, because he was basically doing our bidding. In fact, people don't realize that once Gaddafi flipped sides in 2003 and became basically a proxy of ours, Libyan intelligence was very effective in containing Al-Qaeda and Islamist threats in North Africa on our behalf. And once we went after Gaddafi, that capability was lost. And people need to remember,
it was one of the more freer places too, where
it was absolutely. Syria had some good stuff too,
and it completely changed with once the Islamists got in there.
And
by the way, that's something that I had at least a hand in exposing. Some of the documents that I brought out of the FBI was specifically related to Libya and to what was going on with the Clinton Foundation and funneling money through there.
Well, they were doing more than funneling money. They were running guns out of Benghazi, which is actually what Benghazi was all about in 2012. People don't realize this. The reason Christopher Stevens, the ambassador, was there in a small, no real security is because he was supposed to be meeting these Al-Qaeda leaders in Benghazi to negotiate the transfer of Gaddafi's captured arms to Turkish ships, who would then take those arms to the ISIS types in Syria.
Yeah.
And to fight Assad.
And they were trying to do a dirty deal with basically selling guns to Qatar, and then
that's right.
Qatar selling guns because we couldn't sell it directly. It was just so ridiculous.
It was a repeat of what we did in the Soviet-Afghan war, where we used all these proxies.
Did you ever piece together, or did you ever connect with or see what happened with Mark Turry?
No.
So Mark Turry, if you get a chance
the name sounds very familiar.
If you have a chance ever to interview him, it would be well worth it. I haven't seen the guy ever since, he did one interview or two interviews and that was it. But Mark Turry, at the time that I'm like carrying these documents out, another story was breaking. And that was that Mark Turry, who was an arms dealer, had been indicted by the FBI and, for illegal arms dealing in Libya. Yeah. And he comes out and through his lawyer says the FBI will drop this indictment within 24 hours or I will come out with everything on Hillary Clinton's involvement, and boom, the FBI drops the indictment.
It's sort of like that scene in Lord of War. Remember when? And Nicolas Cage says, "Oh, they're gonna let me out of here. I'm the president's #1 client."
Well, the other big thing that was going on through Libya into Egypt was there were monies coming directly out of the Clinton Foundation, going through multiple shell bank accounts and ending up in the bank account of the head spokesman for the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Right. It was all funded out of the Clinton Foundation.
And remember, you had Muslim Brotherhood members and sympathizers working for Obama. In fact, one of them helped write the Cairo speech in 2009 that Obama gave.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So there's definitely I think, there's has been several miscalculations, and I don't know that I would call them that. I think that they were intentional. But I think that there have been, several moves, to, aid and abet, these Islamist, factions around the Middle East and in Iran and in North Africa. And that's why we are where we are today.
And I would also add to that, I think it is a constant and consistent, it's not just American. The Israelis do it too. Yeah. It is this weird thing where we in the West figure, we can use one Islamist group against the other.
Against the other, yeah.
And it's like they're all part of the same ideology. Yeah. It's remember, I mean, people didn't remember. The Israelis were supporting Hamas for a long time.
Yeah.
And remember, they were running through Qatar. They were washing the money through Qatar. The Israelis were bringing it back to Hamas leaders. And then Netanyahu's people were taking a vig off the top of the money they were giving to Hamas, all under the idea that Hamas can be controlled. We can just pay them off and keep them quiet. And Hamas was sitting there laughing, taking the money and then arming up. It was like
building tunnels and
Yep. And so, but just one thing about the Iran situation that I do believe, I have said this for years, the Islamic Republic is not our friend. I don't want to see them get a bomb. I don't think that they're anyone that we can trust. No. But I'm very skeptical about because Trump said this at the beginning of the war and then he kind of walked away from it. And I don't think this came from him. I think this came from Israel, because Israel's been stovepiping all kinds of weird intelligence to John Ratcliffe, who then circumvents the entire intelligence collections process and goes straight to the president. But basically, and then Lindsey Graham is also involved with this, but basically Trump said that he wanted to stop the Iranians from getting the bomb because they were 2 weeks away from getting the bomb when he went into Iran. I don't believe that's accurate. I don't think the Iranians were 2 weeks away from getting anything. Either they've already had a handful of bombs and they were keeping them in reserve, or they were not near to getting that. But the idea that they were 2 weeks away, it's always 2 weeks. It's 2 weeks. These people love to say 2 weeks, 2 weeks. Everybody says 2 weeks. I don't believe that for a second. I just don't. I don't think there was some smoking gun in the form of a mushroom cloud. I think that for a variety of reasons, the president's partners in Israel had a timeline that they wanted to execute a mission set on, partly because they're seeing the polls in America And the young generation in both parties are no longer as pro-Israel as they once were. And I think that there was some machinations there saying, if we don't go now, we might never be able to do it. And I think the president listened to them, trusted them, and I think he miscalculated. And I think that he's so far, I mean, the economic fallout has been bad, but it hasn't been catastrophic. But I think that if you look at the shortages, going into the fall this year, you're going to see it's going to be like the COVID shutdowns were delayed effects. You're going to see delayed effects coming in the fall where we're going into a midterm. It's going to hit the United States just as bad as the rest of the world, not as bad as Europe and whatnot, but we're going to see shortages here. The planting season has been very bad because we don't have enough fertilizer. It's too expensive. So there's going to be some problems.
That baffles me because the primary ingredient in that is basically nitrogen.
Urea.
It comes from
get
it out of natural gas. Yeah. We're abundant in that. So why but my understanding, because I've talked to, that's a huge resource here in West Virginia.
Yeah.
And
it is. Yeah.
I've talked to many of our our folks in Charleston about this. And I ran for Congress. And while I was doing that, I was looking into all of these economic issues going on in my state. And that issue came up. And I was talking to these folks and saying, hey, why are we not building, these plants to build, to make this stuff here?
Yeah.
And the problem is it's the process of getting them built and also the investment to build them. When I think the problem is their concern is, okay, so let's say it takes, maybe 5 years to start the process of, buying the land and starting the building and all of that and getting the permits and everything. By the time that they're ready to lay the first brick, you're into a new administration and they're shutting it down. So nobody wants to lend.
Yeah, no, it's 100% correct.
This is the reason we don't have more refineries. That's why we
don't have our rare earth minerals set up here, because we have rare earths in the West Coast, but we can't touch them. It's across the board. And this actually cuts back. This actually cuts back perfectly to what we talked about at the top, which is China's rights.
I was just going to say exactly. This is the problem. This is the advantage China has over the United States right now, is that China can do whatever the hell it wants. It's not bound up by basically, I hate to say it, but when Trump said to Xi Jinping, he goes, it's kind of nice that you get to be this emperor, this dictator that has some nice benefits, and he jokingly said, I wish I had that. And because he was right in the sense that the fact that we can't seem to make it, through one administration without having a complete flip of all of our policies, it really does set us back significantly.
It does, and it's also I'm very good friends with the Daily Caller's China reporter Philip Lincheski, and he's a Mandarin speaker. He's one of the top, I think, China reporters in the world, and at least in the West. And he and I have talked about this for a while. Several articles I've provided insights for of his, but he has always said that the Chinese will fund these special interest groups in the United States, like the global, environmentalist groups here and the NRDC and whatnot, so that they will force about these regulatory changes that make it harder for us to acquire the resources we need to be self-sufficient under the guise of global warming and preserving the environment.
The whole climate change hoax, I'm certain, was largely being funded by China.
I think so.
The funny thing is they were the largest producers.
Of course, they still are. They still are.
More than three times what anybody else was doing.
It is amazing. And so, you look at a place like California, I think maybe it's Mountain View, California. I can't remember where, but they have the only rare earth mineral mine and maybe it's Bakersfield, but it's the only rare earth mineral mine in the United States. And it's basically not really used because of all the regulatory burdens. And good luck getting a new one started anywhere, because a lot of the rare earth minerals are in blue states anyway. So they're never going to support this. But even like with the talk that, well, Trump is forcing the world to become dependent on US natural gas and oil. And to some degree, okay, fine, you can make that case, but that's actually not accurate.
That's only going to last for so long anyway.
Well, and it's actually not accurate because I think that was, and I think the highest that we've supplied the world is 6.6 million barrels per day, I think, out of the United States, out of North America. And we're at like 5 million barrels. So we're not even at our highest peak yet.
The best that we can do, I think, is to be energy independent and not have to buy oil from other places. And we'd have, leftover that we could sell. But you're right. We're not, because we are a consumer of our own oil that we produce.
That's right.
The challenge is like, look at what, I think it was just today, Singapore, basically decided to buy oil from Russia.
Right. And India is as well.
That's right. So we may be able to choke off the IRGC from being able to sell oil with the blockade. But eventually, that's going to end. And and there will be either the IRGC will have they'll stay in power, and eventually they'll gain back the ability to sell oil. Or they will fade, and there'll be an internal civil war, and then eventually the Iranian people will begin selling their oil again. But at some point, so that's not a long-term strategy.
No, it's not, because we can't. I talked to somebody at ExxonMobil. I have a contact there, and this individual, by the way, told me after the Maduro raid that no way ExxonMobil's getting heavily involved, whatever President Trump's saying. And this individual basically in an email, it went on forever, this email explaining why ExxonMobil is not going to be too deeply involved with Venezuela. This individual then also, after the Iran thing, he was like, you do understand that there is a limit to what American oil companies and natural gas companies are going to invest here in the United States. And
for the very reason what we were just talking about.
That's right.
That the Trump administration, everything's great, but at max he gets 4 years, and then who knows what's going to end up happening next.
They're worried about ROI. They're also worried about, this is what I was told. This is one person, but what I was told is that in their thinking, they're gaming out down the line. Okay, we're going to have this crisis now, but eventually things will stabilize, and we don't want the price of oil to go too low. So if we're overproducing, that's going to cause the price of oil to go, and then it's going to hurt us. We're not going to get an ROI on all this money we've spent building out new infrastructure and new drills and whatnot. So it's a balancing act that these companies do, which is why at one point in the last 6 weeks, Trump floated this idea of nationalizing part of the oil industry in the United States. I don't know if you remember that, but it was this offhanded remark. He might not have even meant it, but when I heard it, I was like, well, I was like, okay. And he did just authorize the Defense Production Act in the last 48 hours for energy sources in the United States, which again indicates to me that he's thinking he wants to get overproduction going. American companies are not going to do that of their own free will. It's just not in their business interest to do this.
It would be nice if there was gasoline, back down to $2 again.
Well, I live in Florida, and we have higher than the national average, and we are at, I think the average here is $5 a gallon. And the reason I was told that it's this, because so this sounds like California.
That doesn't make any sense.
The reason is because it had something, and again, this is something that someone just mentioned to me, something to do with the fact that we do not drill for our own oil here. We don't do anything for our own oil. We have to basically compete on the global market to get our stuff here. Texas has its own oil. North Dakota can pull its own resources. That's what I was told, and I do know we don't really have a lot of
Florida
drilling.
Doesn't do any drilling in the. They have because off of Pensacola, and
they have a little bit. They have a little bit, but it's not. We're really strict about it here because of the tourism industry. The fear is that if it gets too hot and heavy with the oil production, if that ends up having some kind of a accident, oil spill, it'll ruin the beaches, it'll ruin the ecology, and then the whole tourism industry is jacked up, which will be a huge hit for the state. But this is what I was told earlier today in a sort of offhanded conversation I had with somebody as I was filling up the tank. But it's interesting. It is. I am very worried about what certain MAGA people with very large followings are telling their followers on Twitter about, what's going to be accomplished with this war, because I don't believe half of it. I don't think that we have the capability, for instance, to overnight just start producing our own stuff here, even if everything lined up the way we would want it to, and
on
it's
that
very
note,
Pollyanna-ish.
it is interesting that there has been a push, and this I was kind of surprised, because this, to me, it does kind of seem to indicate a greater policy within, maybe within national security circles
Mhm.
that have, existed in previous administrations, even ones diametrically opposed to Trump.
Mhm.
It does seem to me that there has been a push towards chip manufacturing here in the United
Yeah.
States.
Yeah.
That was happened, that started in previous
CHIPS
administrations
Act.
and continued.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that there was, I was shocked and couldn't believe it, but when you had the Biden administration basically telling Taiwan, or telling China, yeah, we don't really care about Taiwan,
Mhm.
basically giving them the idea that if they invaded Taiwan, we weren't really going to do anything about it. And Trump kind of did the same thing, and I was kind of shocked. So
Yeah.
I'm really surprised at that, but I think that there has been a strategy to be less dependent upon Taiwan, because I think we
Yeah.
see it as an inevitability.
Yeah.
Even if they don't invade, the fact is that they have been very successful in propagandizing and making their way into, getting, basically pro-China proponents within, within the Taiwanese government. And I think that's what's happening over there. I think they see it as an inevitability.
Yeah. Well, I think they also have naturally pro-Chinese. People need to remember that
Mhm.
the Chinese people and a lot of the Taiwanese people that I know still consider themselves kind of culturally Chinese. Now, the Taiwanese are less so, but there is a contingent of Taiwanese people, notably in the KMT party, who genuinely believe that the best course of action for their island is to be back in with the Chinese, either as another province or more likely as some kind of special administrative region. And I think you're seeing that with I'm forgetting her name, the woman who's now the head of the
Mhm.
KMT party. And I
And
know
I
she
don't and I only expect that to grow as
yeah.
the United States basically distance itself more and more from
And
Taiwan.
I do believe that there is going to be no real fight from the United States
Yeah.
to preserve Taiwan.
Which
This is
I'm
why.
kinda, to be honest with you, having been somebody who sat in,
Mhm,
the war room scenarios
mhm.
where they were basically, had fake nations, but you could tell which
Yeah,
nations that they
yeah,
were talking about.
yeah.
And in every scenario that I saw, the United States won, but at a huge cost to
Oh,
our
it's a Pyrrhic victory. It's
massive,
a Pyrrhic victory.
massive.
And we're seeing snapshots of this in Iran. Just is what I keep telling people is, if you want to know what it's going to feel like in a war with China, just look at the worst economic aspects of the Iran war and then multiply it significantly. That's basically what a war with China would look like over something like Taiwan, which, you know, Taiwan's a lovely place, but it's really not, it's just not something that Americans should be dying over at this point. It's just it's a peripheral concern. Plus, like I said, I really believe about 8 years ago is when we lost our advantage in terms of overmatch in the first island chain. If you look at what China's, but you mentioned the man-made islands in the South China Sea, but it goes beyond that. The Chinese have really, using their industrial power, they have created an arsenal, a honeycomb of swarms of advanced missiles, hypersonic weapons. We don't even have hypersonic weapons yet. Drone swarms, drone motherships. They have now undersea drones they're building, fleets of these things, all in that first island chain, all designed to just overmatch whatever the Americans throw at them and to keep us back. So, in my opinion, we shouldn't be fighting over Taiwan. We shouldn't be fighting over anything in the first island chain anymore. We need to reorganize that whole regional defensive perimeter. And I think we need to look at the first island chain as basically de facto in China's orbit. Japan will continue to resist. Good. We'll help them where we can in terms of providing support. But, you know, in terms of fighting over that first island chain, I don't think we can afford to anymore. I think we need to look at reinforcing the third island chain, which is basically the Aleutians, near Alaska, down through Hawaii, down to New Zealand and Australia. That needs to be our line of defense. And then the second island chain in the middle, which is all those South Pacific Ocean islands that we fought in World War II over, that needs to be no man's land. That needs to be the buffer zone, the neutral zone between us, our side, and China's side. And that's kind of where we need to go. And I don't believe for a second, though, Trump or any American president from either party is ever going to commit U.S. forces to fight on behalf of Taiwan. I don't think it's happening now.
Well, I think that it's interesting with China in regards to these islands in the South China Sea that they've created. What is it? The Spratly Islands, archipelago.
Mm-hmm.
There's some interesting things that have been happening with U.S. foreign policy in regards to like the Straits of Malacca.
Yep.
And in Indonesia, making agreements with Indonesia and stuff like that. I for military training and that sort of thing. I wonder if, like, I do think that a complete pullout of the U.S. out of these other countries and stuff would be a bad thing, because I do think that it would create a major power vacuum, and that's something that has changed in my own philosophy, I guess you could say. I after Gulf War I and II, I became very disillusioned with the whole idea of our involvement, policing the world, but we saw what happened when we pulled back, and we basically just kind of allowed things to just happen on their own. You had the rise of China, you had all of these things happening around the world that ultimately pulled us back in, but now at a disadvantage. And so I think that there's something to be said about our involvement, but the question is where is that fine line?
Well, I think having mutual partnerships with a country like Indonesia or South Korea or Japan or India, I think that's fine. I think my personal view on this is, this is something that I was saying to certain people at TPUSA when they were talking about possibly in 2022 having me come out to talk. They didn't like it, so we didn't end up doing it. But something that my mantra lately for the last several years has been, if you want to be considered an independent, sovereign country, whether you're an American ally or not, you have got to be able to stand up on your own. I'm reminded of my friend, Dr. Michael Scheuer, who's very controversial. He's a former Bin Laden unit task force leader for CIA, but he has said for many years, and I agree with him on this, no nation has a right of self-defense. I'm sorry, no nation has the right to exist. They have the right to self-defense.
Yeah.
And if you can't defend yourself, then you don't exist. And you shouldn't be reliant on other countries.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. I think it's like the United Nations. It's in a lot of ways it's kind of a big joke, because it really doesn't matter what any one nation says.
Right.
It only matters what nations do and are willing to do.
That's right.
And it's
what they can do.
It's
that's
the law
another
of
thing.
jungle.
Yeah.
It's the law of power.
That's right.
And so I do think that in that regard, the United States needs to be the most powerful nation on the face of the planet for us to continue to have the level of peace and safety that we have as a nation. But to what degree should we be policing, other parts of the world? And I do think that we have to focus it on, is it in our national interest?
Right. Well, right. I agree. And my personal view, and this has evolved over the last 10 to 12 years, my personal view is actually, I don't think we need to be as forward deployed. I don't think we need to be involved in policing the world at all. I think what we need to do is come back to our sphere of influence, make sure that our backyard is taken care of, and focus for 10 years, basically put a pause on intervening anywhere for at least 10 years and focus like a laser on reshoring American industry, rebuilding the backbone of America. Our people are not doing well. It's, and largely because the industries of America have been gutted and sent overseas to places like China. Unless that problem is addressed in quick order and at a comprehensive level, we won't be able to compete with anybody long term, because we will be. I mean, I remember during the Biden administration, 2024 or 2023, the Raytheon CEO went to Congress, and I'm paraphrasing now, but he said that basically he thinks the idea that the United States would even think of going to war with China is insane, because 69 to 72% of our entire defense supply chain is impacted either directly or indirectly from Chinese products.
Which should never have gotten to
should
that.
never have gotten that, but this is where we are. And so if we want to stop that, we want to fix that, that's a long-term project, and we can't be distracted by getting involved with Middle East and wherever, in Ukraine. We have got to come back home and focus on restoring the heart of America so that we can be strong again. We can't be strong, though, if we're this exposed to the global ravages. And that's why I'm talking a lot about, in the last several years, I've been talking a lot about creating defensive perimeters around the United States, and really being disciplined about how and when and where we get involved outside of our country. It's not because we're heartless. It's because we just can't afford anymore to do this. I mean, look at what's going on in Iran. This was supposed to be a 96-hour war, and we completely misunderstood the enemy we're facing. And this has now turned into a long-term thing, and I'm seriously doubtful that it's going to resolve anytime soon. And so we're going to be stuck in this sort of weird area where it's not fully destructive to us, but it's also not beneficial to us. And it's certainly destructive to our presence in the world, because I can guarantee you, even countries like Britain are now having problems with us because they're being affected more than we are negatively. And certainly the global South, which is really the future of the world, is the rise of the global South. Those countries are intimately tied into China and Russia, into that matrix. And the longer this war goes on and the more it destabilizes the global South, which it is, the less likely these developing economies are going to want to do business with us. They're going to want to stick with the Chinese.
I think that's another area where I think there's been some miscalculation. Is if there was an off-ramp, it would have been for those nations which actually are impacted by the lack of flow of oil, to come and take over the blockade and basically take over the operations in the Straits of Hormuz, and us get the hell out of there.
I don't think they can do that, though. I don't think they have the capacity. I mean, for the Philippines.
Look at what happened with the UK. They couldn't even get their ships out of port.
They can't. Listen, I've been tracking the decline. I lived in Britain for a period of time. I spent time at Oxford. That country has declined in real time, and it's very tragic. And the Royal Navy in particular.
They used to be the most powerful navy in the world.
For 400 years, they were the undisputed champions of the high seas. And in about 70 years since the 1950s, they have become not only a small navy, but a second-rate navy. And so the wild story here is something that I wrote last year when I was writing at the National Interest. I did a deep dive on the two carriers they built, the Prince of Wales and the Queen of Elizabeth. And they can't keep enough warplanes for both ships. They have to pick which air wing is going to go because they don't have enough planes. Then they also don't have enough crews to do long-term. I mean, they can't keep the ships staffed. They can't keep them funded. They can't keep them well-maintained. These aren't even nuclear carriers. These are just new standard-powered carriers. They can't maintain these things. And this used to be the most powerful navy in the world. Yeah. And in some people's lifetimes, by the way, some people who are old now were young when the British Empire still ruled the high seas. Those days are gone. They're done. And so, this is like why, Trump is very angry with the Europeans, and I understand that. But when I hear American leaders, bashing the Europeans, bashing the British, why aren't they taking over the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz? It's because they really can't, because they haven't funded their militaries in any meaningful way for decades. They have relied on us. And we, by the way, it's a two-way street. Until Trump came along, American leaders were fine to let the Europeans rely on us because we didn't want to have to deal with any challenges from them.
Yep. It is a double-edged sword.
Hoist by our own petard.
Yeah.
You know.
Speaking of, kind of where I want to kind of shift our conversation to some of the domestic things that have been happening because there's a lot going on around the world, but I think there's also a lot happening here within our own country that is maybe not getting the focus that it should. You recently had the Democrats, push for this insane gerrymandering in Virginia. It looks like the courts, at least initially, have struck that down. Thank God. You're talking about they couldn't even beat it, I think, by more than, what was it? Like, it was like 40 something to 50 something, and so the Republicans pretty much didn't put hardly any, and I'm speaking from somebody that lives in the eastern panhandle of West Virginia. So I see all the ads. I had ads every night on TV, all day long with Obama talking about how the irony of it, talking about how the Republicans are trying to cheat them out of seats. Meanwhile, a state that is, what is it? I think 6 Democrats and 5 Republican seats and, congressional seats, and they want to make it 1 Republican seat. And and 10.
It's basically what they're doing in California. It's what they did in Illinois. So I lived in Alexandria, Virginia for many years. My wife is her whole family, daughter of American Revolution from Virginia. Her grandmother was the president of the DAR chapter of Northern Virginia. So my wife's from Arlington. So I know Northern Virginia very well. These states were lost a long time ago. Really, in terms of Virginia, I mean, really beginning in 2004 is when you saw really the slide into the far left. In fact, when I lived there and I had to pay a car tax, I had to pay an emissions tax.
Oh, yeah, ridiculous.
And remember, I'm coming from Florida. I was raised in Florida. So I was like, what is this?
You've paid off your car, but you got to still pay a car tax every year. It's ridiculous.
And I would take in my car to get we would take in our car to get it, serviced, and they do the check, and they always found a way to somehow ding me. It was never like, oh, your car is it's passed. It was always some way I had to fork over money.
Maryland somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. So, this is a state that is lost and it's not coming back. I always used to call it Eastern California is what it is. It's the East Coast California. But you're seeing, in my opinion, the real damning thing is not what the Democrats are doing. The Democrats are doing what they always do. They're behaving according to form. They're behaving the way their voters want them to behave. It's the Republicans who can't seem to figure out what they're going to do.
Yeah, they wouldn't pass the SAVE Act.
That's exactly.
Which I don't understand. Exactly. What the heck is going on there? Like, you're right. The Republicans seem to be the ones, and particularly the Republicans in the Senate, that are unwilling to do the will of the Republicans who voted them into power.
They actually disdain the Republicans I worked on the Hill for long enough to see it, that most of the Republicans in Congress, particularly in the Senate, they actually look down their noses at the base of the GOP. People need to remember Peter Strzok and a lot of these FBI guys that, went after Trump in the Russiagate thing. A lot of them were actually Republicans. They actually were Republican voters. Okay. They what's his name? The one who took over from, was it McCabe, who took over for Comey? His wife was a Democrat, but I know for a fact he was a Reagan Republican. And Comey was remember a Republican famously for many years. So a lot of these swamp dwellers in DC, whether they're elected or they're FBI or bureaucrats, they live in Fairfax County, they live in Loudoun County. These are very conservative, relatively conservative areas, but they're all very kind of squishy. And so they may be Republican voters generally, but they're not they don't like the base of the Republican. They look down on the base.
Yeah.
Smelly Walmart voters. Remember, that was the line that I always remember from Strzok. As somebody who goes to Walmart, I shop at Walmart. I don't smell. So that's the problem is the Republican Party. The Republican Party is not actually an opposition party. It's not even actually a real party. It's 4 or 5 parties cobbled together for this ridiculous system we have here of diet, Coke versus Pepsi, basically, is what we have in our political system.
And I'm afraid that we've become even more fractured, I guess you could say, as we've expanded our tent to bring in all of these, so-called, disillusioned Democrats. They've brought with them a lot of their ideologies which don't align with Republican principles, and you see it. You see it in the fracturing of MAGA. And that's something that's interesting that's been happening too.
I think the fracturing of MAGA, though, is the fault of President Trump. I mean, I've been very critical of the president in the last 8 weeks because of the war. I think this was entirely, that is exactly this is his failing. This is, and he has to own it. And he won't own it. And, we don't have to get deep into this, but I actually don't really think it's these dispossessed leftists. In fact, in my experience, the handful of people that I know who came over for Trump from the left are actually more fiery, MAGA than a lot of the people who weren't. It's very interesting to me. Trump has not lived up to some of the promises that, and I understand there's a lot he's up against. I get all that. And he wasn't a pilot. I get all that. But, on the issue of the war, I think he's really dropped the ball. And so I think the splitting of MAGA is not necessarily, it's not Tucker's fault. I don't think it's not anybody's fault other than the president's, because the president decided to act in a way that many people rightly believed was not in accordance with 10 years worth of his previous statements of no new Middle East wars. And I think that is what's contributing to the split within MAGA. Now, the wider Republican Party, these are older issues that we've been dealing with, where the Republicans in the Congress just don't like the voters that vote for them, and they try to undermine them.
Yeah.
You have this weird thing also.
You can look at, we were talking about earlier about those that have interests in China, right?
Right.
The first person that comes to mind is Mitch McConnell.
Absolutely.
And, his wife's family is tied into the largest shipping.
He himself was a lobbyist before he was elected. Remember?
That's right. That's right. Very interesting.
Yeah, well, it is. And I don't actually think the Republican Party is a real party. I say this as somebody who has been involved with every level of the GOP since I was 16 years old. Okay, I'm on the older side of the millennials, but I have been involved with politics at the grassroots level, at the national level, at the policy level for the Republican Party since I was 16. And I can tell you right now, having looked at the last 20 years of my experiences of the evolution of the party, to me, it doesn't seem like a real political party. What do we stand for? I don't know what we stand for anymore. I just know what we're against. We don't like the left. Okay, that doesn't sell. Why Trump was able, I was talking to somebody about this on the phone earlier today. Why was Trump able to get the youth vote in 2024 in a way that very few Republicans in the past have been able to get? It's because he wasn't just criticizing and saying, I'm going to tear everything down. He was offering an alternative vision. And he's losing the youth now because he seems to have lost that alternative vision, and he's just become sort of tearing down everything. And so the Republican Party, though, on a larger scale, has always had this problem where we're great critics, we're great in the minority, but then you give us power and we don't know what the hell we're doing with it. And it's a real problem because the Democrats, they operate in lockstep. They have no problem with they have an ideology. It unites them. The Democrats are interchangeable. Spanberger and Newsom are the same person, basically. It doesn't matter that they're separated by thousands of miles and that one's a woman, it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is Obama, Hillary, same person. These people are interchangeable because it's the ideology that unites them. That gives them a certain strength and a certain consistency that allows for them to be appealing and allows for them to actually run circles around the Republic. Whereas the Republicans, we're tearing each other down. I can't tell you how many times, I've just sat back as these Republican influencers, instead of actually working together to move the ball forward, they're sniping at each other because they want the credit.
Absolutely.
It's epidemic on our side.
It is, without a doubt. Yeah. And I see it as like it's almost like a plague, for like Hollywood, right? Now, except it's moved into the social media realm.
Yeah.
Where you've got people that are making, and this is the part of the problem I think that people have to understand is that we want to believe that people are principled and that they don't have biases that affect their judgment. But the fact is that when somebody has a platform and they are dependent on that platform for their income, they are going to do whatever they think is going to make them the most clicks. Now, I can honestly say I don't make a dime from doing this.
Yeah.
I do it purely out of a desire to just have a platform to be able to say whatever I want.
Yeah.
But if I ever made this my career, you believe it. Yeah, I'm a very principled person and I would do my best to stick to my principles. But at the end of the day, I think that human nature is that you're going to either self-censor or you're going to do things for clicks. And I mean, that's, I think, what we're seeing in a lot of these cases.
I think you're seeing it a lot. I will tell you again, I say this as a 3-time Trump voter. It's a lot of the MAGA affiliated accounts that are really obnoxious about really just not telling the truth or self-censoring. And, it's unfortunate because our side was supposed to be the side of free speech. Our side was supposed to be the side of free thought. We were going to break through. This is why I thought it was so great that when Trump came, he basically had the ability to help to create this alternative ecosystem in the media. But unfortunately, much of that alternative ecosystem is really just, it's really become sort of a lapdog now for whatever the White House is saying, even if what the White House is saying is not always correct. I mean, again, go back to the war.
Well, and it doesn't help that Trump gets on True Social and just says outrageous things
completely outrageous.
I'll just say it. Says things that are unbecoming of a president, and that's just the truth.
Well, the Persian civilization thing was
and not just that, but I mean, even like his personal attacks on people, which are very petty, and to me, it's like it's clear that he is. I think it kind of reminds me of that uncle that everybody has.
Yes, he does.
Just says whatever the hell he wants to say.
That's right.
He's so old he doesn't give a damn anymore,
and he's successful. And why does he care?
Yeah,
right?
What's he care?
Right.
And the problem is that while there are some people that love that, I think the majority of people see that and they're turned off by it.
I think that's true too. I think also it's one thing when you are a very successful real estate mogul. Sure. It's one thing when you are
representing our country.
That's right. That's right. And now you're representing that country in a war that you began. I mean, the president initiated the war, and it's a totally different. And now it's having really real impacts on real Americans. By the way, it's most negatively impacting the very people who are the core of MAGA, middle class and working class people. I mean, this is them not being able to afford groceries, not being able to afford.
I remember when George Bush, like, I have no problem when Trump criticizes the media because I think right, and honestly, I don't have a problem with him criticizing people who are criticizing him, but it's the way that
certainly come after me and him and his people have.
He has been very critical in a way that is just, it's very personal. And to me, it's just inappropriate.
Well, I agree. And I also think when you're attacking the media, even CNN, if they are asking a legitimate question, I don't think it's right to just immediately go for the jugular because it's an inconvenient question. I think you could ignore the question. I think you could say, we'll get back to you, but you don't have to, several weeks ago, and I'm not her biggest fan. Several weeks ago, though, Caitlin Collins was in the Oval Office. Yeah, she was being loud, but they were all like this. This is how it is. It's part of the show. She asked, I thought it was a question about, I think it was a question about the downed warplane, the two pilots. She just asked, basically, it was like basically she was asking like what's really going on, and he went after her. He said really nasty things about her, and it's like, okay, you know, she's obnoxious, I get it, but at the same time it's like that was a fair question. You shouldn't save your ire for when she says something really crazy like she was during the Russiagate stuff. That was crazy and you should have attacked. But when you're asking a question about like, well, what's going on with the war plan? Are they okay? You don't get angry about that. You have to be able to be more measured. And frankly, you know, a lot of people, and where I live in Southwest Florida is one of the most MAGA. This is like one of the reddest districts in the country.
Mhm.
Okay. And we have a lot of, just down the road from me, there's a cluster of very wealthy donors that I know who are big time Trump guys. A lot of people that I know in this community with these tweets or Truth Socials are saying, is he all right mentally? Is he feeling okay? What do you think's going on? And as the president, you don't want to have these questions asked by people who are supporters of you.
I understand why he does it. I do think that it is. I don't think it's just an off the cuff thing. I do think there is some intention behind it. I read his book years ago, and when you understand the way that he thinks, and you're right, it's the New York real estate mogul mentality. That it just does not comport with what Americans expect of a president in terms of communicating. And, you know, he's great about some things, like communicating, you know, what he believes and, you know, and why he wants to do something. I think that, you know, he doesn't allow himself to be, you know, wishy-washy in that regard. And that part of him, I like the fact that it's something. It's funny, like to the rest of the world, he's unpredictable, but to me, he's pretty predictable. And because he says what he thinks and he does what he says. But where I see a problem and a disconnect is I do think that he is now in his final term. He has nothing to lose. But what I'm concerned about is that it could cost the Republican Party, as you said, that may not really be all that much of a party in future election. And I think if it went to the Democrats with the way that they have become, which I think the Democrats have become so far left, like they've moved the goalposts so far to the left, I think that it would be extremely destructive to this country.
I think you're probably right, but
I would love to see a Marco Rubio, to be honest with you.
I wouldn't. I got to tell you, it doesn't even matter to me because 2028 we're losing. It's to me, this whole thing's a wash. I think Rubio will be the nominee for the same reason that John McCain was the nominee in 2008. It's a Hail Mary pass. They're going to let this guy run with it. I don't think JD is going to run at all. I think if JD runs, he's a fool because I don't think he's going to get the ring. I think that the Democrats look. So I know a lot of Democrats, and lately, because I've been critical of the president, a lot of these people that I used to know who are Democrats are reaching out to me, acting like, well, it doesn't mean that I'm a Democrat. It just means I'm calling the president out when I think he does something wrong. But in this media environment, people assume, you know. So I have a lot of people I know who are pretty high up in the Democratic Party that I used to work with alongside and always maintain good relations with. They are now reaching out to me. They're saying things to me privately that indicates to me that everybody assuming on the right, the reason the Democrats have been quiet for the last year is because, well, they just were so badly beaten. That might have been the case in the first few months of the second term of Trump. That's not the case anymore.
Well, they're doing all of the, I won't say right things because I think they are immoral, but they are doing the things that I think give them a great advantage in future elections. And the Republicans are doing nothing to stop it.
Well, they're not even doing anything to forward their own agenda. Exactly. I mean, it's not even a question of stopping. We're not, like I said earlier, we're not presenting an effective alternative vision. We're just negating at best what they're trying to do. That's not an effective long-term strategy. It's basically a defensive strategy. It's inherently going to lose. But what the interesting thing, the Democrats that I'm hearing from is that basically the minute that they win the midterms, they're going after key elements of the Trump administration, notably Hegseth, and they've already got the criminal indictments lined up. They're going to accuse him of war crimes. They're going to, and they believe Trump is going to ultimately throw Hegseth to the wolves.
Honestly, I think if there's anything that we can see from the past, it's that, and this is to me, I think it's one of the reasons that I think it's a fool's errand, to be honest with you, for anybody to serve in the Trump administration.
I agree.
Is they will become a target.
That's right.
Of the
and Trump will not protect them.
Of the lawfare machine of the left is going to go after every single one of them. That's what happened, after 2020.
Yep.
And they went after every single one of them. And look at what they did to all of Trump's attorneys.
Right.
And
John Eastman is the most prominent one. Look what just happened to John.
And so to me, it is kind of crazy. And that's not right. To be clear, I think it's absolutely atrocious what the Democrats are doing. But unfortunately, that is the environment that we live in. And if I was in a position to where I knew that was coming, I would be doing everything within my power to secure victory in the future for the Republican Party. Because if the Democrats get in control, that's the first thing they're doing is they're going to go after every single
one, after everybody,
and they're going to try and they're going to tie them up in lawfare until they have no money or are wrongfully prosecuted and put in jail.
There's a key difference here between the first term and the second term. In the first term, the Democrats had nothing. They were just throwing everything at the wall, impeaching him for any reason. It was complete bollocks. This time, you've got real potential criminal issues with things like possible war crimes, which I'm not a believer. I think that we have a right to defend against. Okay. But the point is, it's not what I think. It's about what is legally possible. The Democrats think they have a lot of cases ready to go. And I think this time they might get some scalps in ways they didn't in the first term. And, James Carville's been very clear about this. He doesn't want Trump out of office. He doesn't want Trump to die. He said, I don't want him to die because I want him to suffer. I want him to suffer. And, now, but the key thing here is, I think that is
the attitude.
That should be the indicator of what they have planned. Yeah. What they have planned is to torment Trump for his final 2 years, to basically ensure he is a lame duck. And I think right now this is already baked into the cake because of all the shortages that are coming from the Strait of Hormuz thing. And that's going to really topple the economy this fall. I hope I'm wrong. But if the economy is toppled like I think it's going to be, if people can't afford to survive, even for a short period of time, it will have an impact at the polling station.
There's that saying, it's always the economy, stupid. And
that's right.
I do think
that was James Carville's. That was his saying.
And that is the truth. And the fact is that this war there's this false notion that a lot of people have that war creates jobs and all of this. But at the end of the day, in the grand scheme of things, it spends money that could have otherwise been spent on domestic things.
That's right. Guns and butter. Right.
That's right. Right. And so the more that we can avoid it, the better it is for the economy. Now, that's not always good for national security, but that's why I said there's like a fine line there. There's a balance, right, between us having enough projection of power in the world that we kind of keep the peace, but not so much that we are breaking our economy or breaking the bank to do it. And that is and to your point earlier, in all the previous administrations, in allowing them to basically use us, to no end when it came to, defensive, protection and all of that, like all of our bases. Why do we have a single base in Europe? It makes no sense. I can understand when the USSR existed, kind of made sense, but doesn't make any sense anymore. Why do we have, all of these bases all around the world? That to me is something that we probably do need to shift and shut down those bases and bring back our troops.
It's going to happen now, not because we want it to happen.
Because it has
to happen because it has to, and because the rest of the world is looking there. Listen, the rest of the world is looking at the Arab states. They're even looking at Israel, and they're saying, boy, you guys were really close with the Americans, and this thing popped off, and look at your countries. They got rocked
Yeah.
they were targets because the bases were there. They were targets because you let the Americans station troops there. And so a lot of the rest of the world is looking around going, we don't want this arrangement anymore. It doesn't protect us. It
No, I
actually
think
makes
we
us
would be
targets.
better off having our bases here and
I agree.
selling planes and bombs
Yep.
and all that to everybody else. You know,
I agree.
let
Well,
them
actually, just
defend
more
themselves.
generally, and this again, I think it's a great place to close it because this gets us back to where we began. More generally, the 21st century, the real battlefield is the economy.
Yeah.
That's the battlefield. It's the industries that undergird the economy and trade and economy. And we have really let those areas go to focus on being this big global military force. What has it gotten us? It has not benefited the country at all. It has drained the country. It is weakening the country. China, though, is focusing on their economy, on their industry, on their trade, and they look like a more attractive partner right now. And that's never a good thing if you're trying to maintain your global power. That's not a good thing for us.
Well, and China has, they have very effectively kind of stayed out of all of this.
Of course,
and I think
by design.
Yep. I don't think it
does nothing. Still
my
wins.
my initial thoughts were that maybe China was more of a paper tiger than we thought, but now I've kind of like sat back and looked at what's been going on around the world, and I think they are biding their time.
Yes.
I think they are strategically staying out of things that don't really, that they know eventually are going to turn back into their favor.
Yeah.
And I think but they're willing to, to basically take a step back. This is the art of war.
Yeah.
Weakness when you're really strong.
It's also Deng Xiaoping's 24-character strategy from the 90s. Remember, bide your time and hide your capabilities.
Now, do you think
thing.
The one thing that's kind of interesting, I just want to kind of touch on this just lightly before we close.
Yep.
There has been some things that have been happening within China in terms of Xi Jinping, going after and firing generals and coming through and clean up. And kind of the thought is that there may be some, potential power moves happening, within the, the communist, Chinese Communist Party. What are your thoughts on, because that's happened in the past too.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on that? What are you seeing happening on that front? Is this a something that could destabilize some of that power?
Well, look, the Chinese political system is like any political system. There are factions and there are different power centers, and they compete with each other. I think I think that the purges that were talked about in January, February of this year, I think those are completely overblown. I think what you had, if you actually look at the people who were purged, there was this whole narrative in the Wall Street Journal and in American media and Western media, completely divorced, in my opinion, from what was really going on, claiming that, there was this alternative power center and they were rising and it was a coup d'etat attempt and blah, 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 blah. I don't believe any of that. I think what happened was Xi Jinping cleaned house under the guise of corruption. And you have to remember, when he says corruption, there are actually a lot of corrupt generals in China, especially those older guys. So
they're also very decentralized, much like how Iran is. And that's right. Designed. Like their whole cybersecurity warfare is completely isolated from each other.
That's right.
That there's that they can do operations.
Yep.
And have it not be an act of war because the president,
that's right. That's right. And that actually plays
war.
out throughout the whole system, by the way. Ask anybody who does business in China, and they will tell you that it's remarkably decentralized.
Yeah.
The local party is distinct from, and so what Xi's trying to do is centralize more of that. I think because he wants greater command and control for when if he ever does decide to pull the trigger on a military operation. But I don't believe that Xi Jinping was ever under any real threat. And furthermore, I think if anything, after these purges, Xi is more powerful and has more freedom of maneuver than he ever did before. Yeah. And I just say, I'm not going to say his name because I don't want to embarrass him, but I have a very good friend, one of my old timers. He is a British geopolitical guy, and he was on another show with me. Actually, he was on Emerald's show with me last July, and he outlined for me and for the whole world about how by November of last year, Xi was going to announce he was retiring because he was being pushed out of the party and they were threatening his family. It never happened. It never happened. It was all malarkey, and this was being spun by a bunch of Chinese expats in the United States who were trying to gin up everybody into supporting some kind of move against China, just like you have all the Iranian expats today doing the same thing. And bottom line is the Chinese system is durable. It has endured a lot. It will continue to endure a lot. And we need to start figuring out how we're going to survive in this system, in this world where there is a durable China. China's not collapsing.
Their durability, it really stems from it. I believe, and it's the same thing as to why the IRGC has durability, because they rule with an iron fist. And
that's
the fact
part
is
of it.
that'll never happen here in the United States.
No, that's part of it. I just want to say something though.
Yeah.
The Chinese elite are extremely educated. These are an extremely educated group of people. These are cool customers, and they are very well educated. I mean, look, the average Chinese apparatchik in the CCP has a background in either engineering or some related STEM field, a computer science background or something. They are scientists, literally in many cases, who go into politics. What is the average American political elite? A lawyer or a lobbyist?
Yeah.
Okay, we are led by the biggest idiots you can imagine.
I've always said that politics in America is really it's a popularity contest.
That's right. Well, it's at best
steroids.
Yeah. But the point is that in China, these people who run the country are really quite brilliant. They're literally like very smart people, and so you see the durability. It's because they have a high IQ. They can anticipate. So like this thing with Trump's claiming, oh well, we're indirectly going after China's energy flow. Yeah, to some degree. The Chinese knew this was a possibility. They've known for 20 years this was a possibility. So like the IRGC having time to harden their and decentralize their regime, the Chinese had time to build up their own strategic reserve. They had time to start offloading and getting new energy sources from places like neighboring Russia. And also, by the way, ironically, their green revolution, which is not wind, it's nuclear power, it's geothermal power, it's hydropower, it's space-based solar power now. They have spent the last decade building the infrastructure for that, so that now a lot of the world is turning to them to say, we can't get oil anymore. We want to buy your alternative energy sources. And China is there with this ecosystem. So the Chinese anticipated, life is about anticipation. And the Chinese anticipated it because they're very smart. And our leaders, unfortunately, generally speaking, are very dumb. And, this is why we keep getting, crap falling on our heads, wondering what's going on. It's because we don't have the best and brightest leading us. They're not.
My concern has been not necessarily the lack of education or even the lack of intelligence, but the lack of humility. That there's a lot of hubris, and that is always going to lead to downfall.
Well, there's a lot of hubris, though, in the young people in China, though. So this is something that true of us, but Lee Kuan Yew, the great Singaporean leader, who I think is one of the great statesmen of the 20th century, Lee Kuan Yew, before he died, gave a speech at one of the Chinese universities because they loved him in China, and he said that he said to the young people there, the graduating class there, he said, your parents were humbled by Mao's excess, the Cultural Revolution and things like that. He said they understood humility, and this is why China's rise has not ruffled the feathers of the West. He said, but your generation is the first generation, and this was in 2010, he gave the speech. He said, your generation is the first generation in Chinese modern history that has had more than they know what to do with. He said, the problem is you have all been raised on what he called the wolf's milk of nationalism. And his warning was, you're arrogant because you only know abundance, unlike your parents. The Americans
dealing with in America.
And the Americans are arrogant. And his concern was these two groups of young people who were rising in their respective countries, China and America, were on a collision course because they were both so arrogant and unyielding.
Yeah,
I think that's where this is headed.
That's very interesting. That's a very good point. Well, with that, the there's something that I always do. I always end my show with prayer, and that's
Thank
because I always see it as like this: that look, we can talk all we want, and we can, we can try to influence people. At the end of the day,
It's the Lord's work.
nations rise and fall, and it's not really
right.
by our hands. I think it is by His hand. And
I
so
agree.
I want to pray and just ask for Him to, to bless our country and bless the world, bring peace, and I think that's the best thing we can do. Heavenly Father, I thank you, Lord, for this time, this discussion. It's been very informative. I pray, Lord, that you would reach the people who surround Trump, Lord, and reach our president as well, and help to bring some humility back to that office. I pray, God, that you would lead, put wisdom in the people that are surrounding Trump and that are advising him. And I pray, God, that you would help us to find an off-ramp in this situation in the Middle East. Help us to ultimately have victory for the sake of the people of Iran. I pray that they would be able to have freedom again. I pray, Lord, for our relationship with our partners around the world, that you would realign things in a way that is healthy and that leads to stability in our world. And ultimately, Lord, we know that that everything is in your hands. And so we just ask, Lord, for peace. We ask for peace in our country and peace around the world. And Lord, I pray that you would lead us out of this darkness that seems to be plaguing our nation with the divisions internally between parties, between political leanings. Bring back unity in our nation, and hopefully not through some catastrophic event. But we just ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you,
Brandon. I appreciate your time on here. This has been a great discussion, and very rarely do I get somebody on who challenges me in my thinking on some things that that I end up kind of seeing things a little differently afterwards. So I appreciate.
Well, thank you. I try.
And I want to thank all of our watchers and listeners, and thank you guys for being a part of the show. I hope that you got something out of this, and want to just tell you to continue to try to be as independent in your perspective and get the views of others. Don't just be in an echo chamber. I think that's critically important, to being successful. Is you got to be able and being successful in kind of interpreting what's happening around you. There's so much bias and so much propaganda being pushed on all sides nowadays. It's really hard to be able to see through it. Yeah. And I think we did a little bit of that today. So I think we saw through it. And I think we talked about things from a very realistic perspective. Doesn't mean we're always going to get it right. And that's the difficulty of not being able to see every possibility that is there. But I do think that when we can kind of take a step back and look at the greater picture, and having lived in other parts of the world, and I think helps with that. I think it gives us a better perspective, that gives us some wisdom that goes beyond just what we're being fed through the media. So again, thanks everybody for listening. Please like and subscribe, and please share this with others. With that, God bless and have a good night.
Good night.
Raise some Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.